friends, my name is Marines, and as a booktuber, I occasionally get the question that I feel like a lot of us get, and that is whether I also write or if I ever want to write a book. And the answer to that is kind of complicated. Like, that is for sure a thing that I think I would enjoy doing, but it's not something that I consistently work towards. That said, I've pretty much been writing all of my life. I studied communications in college, and I've worked professionally as an editor and translator. Right now, I do side work, like freelance work, as an editor, as a beta reader, and as a sensitivity reader. So today, I wanted to share with you guys some writing advice, and specifically some writing advice that I feel like was really cemented for me, or that I was really taught because of reading bad books. And this is advice that I often pass on to my clients. So I thought it would be interesting to share with you guys the piece of advice and the bad book that very much exemplifies it. These books are going to be no surprise to you if you watched my channel at all, because they are books that I've talked about frequently, not liking, but let's jump into the list. So starting off with Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. There are so many things that I could say about the bad writing in this book, but I wanted to talk about the point of view. It is not within the scope of this video to talk about the different points of view and the pros and cons to each of them, but this series of books is told through Bella's first person point of view, through her narration, and consistently throughout the series, we get Stephenie Meyer either cheating at narration or completely breaking the point of view. So what do I mean by cheating at narration? I think a great example of this is that scene where Bella walks into the cafeteria and sort of notices the Cullens for the first time. They're all hanging out at their spooky table or whatever. We, the reader, know that Edward can read minds. And so, an excuse if I'm not remembering it 100%, I'm going off memory here, but at one point, Jessica thinks Edward's name and his eyes shoot up and look at Bella. Their eyes sort of meet, but it's very brief. In fact, Meyer describes how brief the interaction really is, but then she infuses all of this meaning that she could not possibly had through a limited first person point of view about how Edward lifted his gaze as if he was expecting to hear something and he didn't, or as if somebody called his name and we know that somebody thought his name. So it's infusing all of this meaning into literally a 1-second glance that is very significant later, but that our first person point of view could have no way of knowing. Meyer does this constantly. For a while, when I first read Twilight, I thought that Bella had some sort of prophecy magic because she kept having these prophetic dreams about Edward and they are never explained. She just kind of has these prophetic dreams, but again, it's all of these ways that she's cheating in order to put things into this first person point of view that shouldn't be there, things that Bella shouldn't know and she shouldn't have access to. So those are kind of annoying. They're just, to me, like I said, cheating a little bit, but there are times where she just completely breaks the point of view, and I can't remember which book it was. Eclipse, maybe? I don't know. They're all kind of jumbled in my head now. But it's at one point that Bella is sleeping, and Edward and Jacob are arguing, but Bella is still narrating to us what's happening. She's still telling us, even though she's sleeping, and I'm like, okay, honey. That's not the way this works. What I often see writers doing is kind of infusing meaning into other people's actions, and that is fine in some situations where if somebody's yelling and crying, you can kind of assume what the reactions are there, but a lot of times when it's limited to facial expressions or in the eyes, again, there's just some limitation there to what your character can know about what somebody else is thinking and doing in first person. Speaking of reactions, we're moving on to 50 Shades of Grey, and from here I wanted to talk about just facial descriptions and reactions and body language and the way that E.L. James just abused all of those things. And really, wow, I recapped 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight chapter by chapter over on Snark Squad, and one of the things that we were constantly talking about, or one of our favorite tags on 50 Shades of Grey, was, do you own a face? So it was a question we were constantly asking ourselves, if E.L. James even owned a face, because of the way that she was describing people's faces and the sorts of things that they were doing. What started out as a joke joke is now like a thing that I do while I'm reading, and then I ask my writers to do. And it's like, if you are saying somebody is doing something with their face, act it out, try it out. Like if you're saying like something in 50 Shades of Grey where she says like her eyes widened and brow furrowed, like try it out with your own face. And if that is not a facial expression that you have ever made or have seen anybody make, or if it is physically impossible to make, like cut that out, figure out what you really are trying to convey. And a lot of times just simplify the language. We try to fancy up all of like these facial descriptions, you know, with the quirking and the cocking and all of this, and all we really want to say is he looked confused. And so, you know, there are times where that simplicity can very much work, especially if all of the padding of these descriptions is just making it less clear instead of more clear, or if it's taking the reader out of the story to go, huh, or try and figure out, you know, what exactly you're saying your character is doing, you're doing yourself and your story a disservice. One thing that James also did a criminal amount is describe eyes and give a lot of like emotion and personification and things like that to eyes. And you know, eyes are very expressive. I feel like people have told me that I have very expressive eyes, and you can see certain emotions in the eyes. You know, when somebody smiles, their eyes tend to smile with them. If somebody's sad, clearly they're gonna start like leaking stuff from their eyes. So there are emotions that are definitely kind of held in the eyes, but this, you know, like her eyes clouded over and then on and on from there, sort of building up from that level. If your eyes are doing too much speaking, I feel like that's something that your readers will pick up on. And a lot of times what you're trying to convey through the eyes are things that could be conveyed through like body language. So instead of saying about, you know, all of the whatever that is being clouded and lightning and whatever in the eyes, talk about what they're doing physically. So are they moving away from our character, hunching over, you know, balling their fists, things that are more natural to the human experience and more believable than, you know, the 3-act play that is happening in your character's eyes. Next up, we have City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, and this is also on the topic of descriptions, but in City of Bones, I didn't like Claire's descriptions anyway. I thought that in general her descriptions were very overly simplistic. A lot of times what counted for description in City of Bones was just sort of like, and there was a cup here and it was black, and there was a painting here and it was red, and there was this here and it was listing items, and a lot of times tying that to color. But my big issue here, and the piece of advice that I have, is about the placement of description, which I know sounds weird, but what Claire does a lot is that it would be like, and then the monster came at us and was like, you know, coming through the door, and Jace's eyes glittered gold. And I was like, okay, ma'am, wait a second. Why are we pausing in this moment to notice eyes? You're breaking up your action with this description. Like, never mind that it is of Jace's eyes at this moment where that does not matter at all. But sort of the placement of the description was something that I took a lot of issue with in City of Bones. So I don't think that it's okay to overuse this, because I feel like this will also create a pattern and a monotone. But I often ask my writers to think about the way that their character is sort of moving through the world. So if they're entering into a room, for instance, what's the first thing that grabs their eye? What's the first sort of description that you would give? Or is it that they would enter the room and do something immediately? So kind of putting yourself in that position and think about like, what if you were the one entering a room full of, you know, 5 other characters and they're all sitting around a table, what would be the first thing you notice? What would be the first thing that your eye kind of goes towards? And describing it that way and making sure that your action is grouped up in a way where some of this description isn't cutting the action where you don't want it to be cut, and that it feels logical to the reader as well, that they don't feel like, you know, that they're being kind of whiplash between either action and description, or that there's something really critically important in the scene that you're not looking at because you're over here, you know, describing somebody's golden glittery eyes or whatnot. So I think that considering it that way is really helpful, and that placement of description can really make or break, especially action scenes. I know some of you might be waiting for this one to pop up, but next we have A Court of Thorns and Roses. The book that showed me everything I didn't ever want to know about the M dash. So let's talk about punctuation. Punctuation is such a wonderful tool, not only for making it possible to read and giving language more form, but it also is a really powerful tool in order to have readers sort of get your tone and to measure out the rhythm of your words as well. But unfortunately, that can be taken to an extreme, which is what happened, I think, in A Court of Thorns and Roses. I always talk about sort of the overuse of the M dash in that work. So people are always like, oh, I use M dashes too. I use M dashes too. I think M dashes can be a great tool. I think that the problem is not just the quantity or the number of M dashes that she used. I mean, that's part of the problem, but the way that she was using it. And it became this thing where it wasn't just to add sort of rhythm in her writing occasionally to mix it up or spice it up, but it was this tone forcing, and in such a way and so repeatedly that it was creating a monotone in her writing, and again bringing the reader out of the story. But because it was just constantly these interruptions of her own thoughts, these slamming on the brakes. That's sometimes what an M dash can feel like. It's that pause before you have some other piece of the sentence. But if you're constantly doing that, imagine being in a car with somebody who's driving constantly just slamming on the brakes. And that's what I found with Sarah J. Maas's work overall, but very, very much so, I think, the most in A Court of Thorns and Roses. So I mean, I guess watch out for your M dash is the very specific piece of advice. More than that, I think it's important to think about the ways that you are leading your reader, and in terms of, getting them to read the way you want them to read versus just kind of writing it a little more openly and allowing room for interpretation. My final piece of advice comes from pretty much all of these, and it is about repetition. This happens to, I think, the majority of us when we write. Happens to us when we speak as well. I catch this all the time when I'm editing my videos, that I will just pick up on a word in a video and use it multiple times within that video. The last one that I recorded, I think I said ultimately just more times than is normal. I don't know. I just said ultimately once, and it was a word in my head then, and I kept using it several times throughout the video. So it happens to us, right? We get sort of a word in our head and we use it multiple times. It happens to a lot of writers in their writing as well. They favor a certain word. In 50 Shades of Grey, we had an active and running murmur and whisper count because of the number of times that E.L. James used it. We all know Stephanie Meyer likes chuckled. In A Court of Thorns and Roses, it was less about a specific word that I picked up on and more about Maas's tendency to use 3 descriptions in a row. So it was always this and this and this for everything, for every freaking thing. She described it 3 times, or there were 3 verbs to go along with every action. So it was that constant beat in her writing that just made it really tedious to read. I think these are things that are difficult to pick up on in your own writing, and it's why CPs and beta readers are really great, because they can kind of say, hey, you keep using the word chuckle over and over again. Might want to look into that. I would rather see said repeated than something chuckled, especially because chuckle isn't necessarily what you mean all the time, is he really chuckling every time that you're saying this, or gasping. Are you really gasping this many times? How many times in your day-to-day life do you go, honestly, where that can happen multiple times in a scene? And that is something, again, that readers might pick up on, and then it will take them out of the reading experience to think, why is this character gasping so much? So anytime that you can kind of go through your work with an eye towards either words or phrases that you repeat, or also the repetition of certain sentence structures, which we kind of talked about in terms of the M dash, or sentence length. If you're always starting a sentence with a parenthetical, or if you're always, have sentences that are compound sentences, those are things that you can mix up a little bit to keep your writing feeling fresh, even if the reader won't think about it in so many words. They won't think, all of the sentence lengths were really wonderfully varied in this book. It is something that will contribute to the ease of writing and sort of the rhythm that you create in your story. On the other hand, though, if you overuse a word or you overuse a sentence structure or things like that, that creates friction. And these are opportunities, as I've been saying, for your reader to take takes notice and to sort of jump out of the experience of reading itself. I hope those were useful pieces of advice. I think they're also not only like writing advice things, but they are like good things to note or notice if you are looking to become a more critical reader, or if you are a reviewer who kind of wants to break down the experience of reading and what are things that work for you and don't work for you. So hopefully that was helpful. Also though, like maybe listen to none of this advice and do all of these things and be as damn successful as these writers have been, because they are out there making bank with their badly written books. And you know, I want that for you too. So go live your best life. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. One thing, what are those things called?